I am Ken Winnikin. I'm a retired pastor. I was in King of Kings in Renton before we moved down here. As you can tell, I also served in Hawaii for a while. So, mele kalikimaka to all of you. Anyway. So, the scripture reading talks about light and darkness. And that's kind of the theme I'm going to work with today. And the reason for that is that as I was looking for scriptures to use, it was really dark outside. Do you know that Friday was the darkest day in Seattle in 20 years? It felt like it, right? And this is almost the darkest day of the year, December 21st. And in the Northwest, one of the things we had to get used to moving here was there's only about, at the max, 8 hours of daylight during the winter. And I'm thinking that that's maybe why Christmas lights are so attractive to us. I don't know, they seem to be everywhere, right? In fact, our homeowners association up there kind of says, okay, you can put them up anytime you want to, but you can't turn them on for 30 days until 30 days before the holiday, and you have to turn them off 15 days after the holiday. Well, my thinking is I'd like them in January and February, but they won't let us do that. Anyway. But as you may recall from Isaiah 9 verse 2, it begins by saying that the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light, and almost as if to emphasize it, says those living in the land of deep darkness, on them a light has shone. Well, in the scriptures, the Bible often equates darkness with evil of all kinds, and ignorance, and separation from God. Talks about it in terms of being injustice and greed and war and all of that. Well, in Isaiah's day, when he first wrote these, about 700 BC, it was a dark time for the nation of Judah. They were under the threat of attack from Assyria. They were afraid they were going to be destroyed like the nation of Israel. They had been warned by other prophets that they were forsaking their covenant with God, and that they were devoid of justice and righteousness. It was just dark from God's perspective all around them. And in fact, later on, they ultimately are conquered by the Babylonians and taken off into captivity. But you know, the darkness continues, yeah? In Jesus' day, when the day Jesus was born, Christmas Day, there was a violence in the world. I know there was the peace of Rome, but there was all kinds of things going on. There was an abuse of power. There was homelessness. Let's see, Mary and Joseph couldn't find a place to stay, right? Refugees fleeing from oppression. Joseph had to take Mary and Joseph to Egypt to protect them. Families were ripped apart. There was a different kind, but a very deep darkness going on. And so that's why I thought when we sing this Christmas carol, we only sang the first 3 verses. It gets better. But Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and you may know him from your literature classes, wrote the words for this. In 1863, what was going on in 1863? There was a civil war, right? His father had just recently passed away. His son was in the army, and he didn't know where he was and what kind of condition he was in. And it's Christmas Day, and so he sits down and he pens this poem, and he says, the hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. The hate is strong. He mocks the song. Talk about a darkness in his own life. Well, How about our own day? And I'm not talking just about the darkness of the daylight or lack of daylight. We struggle with a kind of darkness as well. We find that as much as we try, we cannot cure every illness. We cannot obliterate suffering. We live in a dark world in many ways, externally and internally. People inside, we live, some of us, unfortunately, with a great deal of despair. There's a darkness of drugs. There's fear of war and death. We deal with illnesses and even evil acts and evil people around us. That's a bummer. I'm thinking as I say this, Merry Christmas. Where's the merry in that? So far, not a whole lot, right? Because it is talking about darkness. And the problem with darkness is that what we're finding out is it cannot fix itself, right? Darkness cannot fix itself. It has no ability to bring any light in to illuminate it. And we're finding that true, aren't we? As we look for more kindness in the world, and we hope that people will be getting better and better, and sometimes we're getting worse and worse. We'd like to have a Hallmark movie, right? Yeah? We could watch them all day. We'd like to have a Hallmark movie, but what we get instead is hatred or prejudice or evil or whatever the darkness is for us. And the only way to remove darkness from a room, is you have to bring in a candle or a flashlight, kind of like what we were symbolizing with the candlelight services yesterday. It has to be an external light source, right? It has to come from outside. All right. So here's the good part of this story. Because Isaiah says, the people who walked in darkness have seen what? A great light. On them, in fact, he repeats it. He says, on them a light has shone. And he is so confident about this that he actually, if you notice it, he says it's in the past tense. It's already happened. We celebrate the light coming today, but Isaiah, in the midst of all of that darkness, he writes about the light having already come. And the darkness has already been overcome. And maybe that's why Christmas lights are such a powerful image for us, is because they immediately bring light into darkness. Isaiah goes on and he describes this light as the dawning. It's dawning like the sun. Yeah? Remember the first thing that God creates in Genesis? It's light, isn't it? To illuminate the darkness of the void. He gives us night and day. The sun gives us life. And without it, we'll die. The sun shows us the truth. Sunlight kind of illuminates things all around us. That's why we'd like to have more in December. We get to see things as they really are. And sunlight is beautiful. It brings joy to us. I know when we see it, we call it a sunbreak. It's a deal, right? Don't you find yourself looking for blue sky once in a while, just up here, over here? We need the sun to overcome sadness. I don't know about you, but we dealt with that seasonal affective disorder, not enough light when we first moved here. The sun does that. And I'd like to suggest the sun, S-U-N. Isaiah's talking about the sun, S-O-N. Because what he is saying here is that in the midst of darkness, whether it is Isaiah's or Jesus, or whether it is our day, or whether it is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's day. There is hope because there is already light in the darkness. And I wonder if Isaiah, maybe Longfellow, thought about Psalm 27, which says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Even in the darkness." So there's no more walking in darkness, Isaiah said, because the light has come. How can he be so sure? How can he write this in past tense? And so he goes on. This is one of the Christmas prophecies. For, because unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, is how Isaiah describes this light in the darkness. It's a child, a baby, a son. Who is it? Isaiah maybe had an idea, but it's Jesus, isn't it? I mean, that's an Old Testament Christmas prophecy because the only one who fits it is the baby whose birth we celebrate today. In John 1, first chapter of the Gospel of John, it says the Word, which was a name used for Jesus, was in the beginning with God. He was there at the creation. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness. Isn't that interesting? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And then in verse 14, he says, the Word became flesh. Jesus, the Son of God, the child that Isaiah talked about. That Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we've seen his glory. Glory is of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. A child. So how does light come into that darkness? Remember, it has to take an outside source to do that. God alone can do that. God alone does it through his Son, the one Isaiah talked about, through his Son Jesus, who comes as this baby on Christmas. So really, it's Jesus himself who comes into our dark world. God himself took on a human form. Imagine that. A baby, no less. And as Pastor Tim mentioned yesterday, that's a claim no other religion makes, that God would take on human flesh in the form of a baby and live among us. It's almost as if Isaiah wants to make it perfectly clear who this son, who this child is, because he gives him names that attach only to God. This is the other part of that Christmas prophecy. Names like Wonderful Counselor. God's going to bring a divine program that's going to bring justice and righteousness and hope to the world. It's going to come only as God brings it and only as we follow him. He's a mighty God. Sorry, Matt, I'm having troubles with this thing flipping, but so bear with me if I do this. It doesn't mean anything. Except that my mic has fallen off. Let me go back. Wonderful Counselor, mighty God, one who has the power to do all things. He created the world. He sends his Son to save the world. And he brings hope to live in the midst of our darkness. He brings light for a dark, sinful world. He's an everlasting Father. Interesting that Jesus is also in the Trinity, the Father. He will be an enduring, compassionate provider and protector who will care for us when we are in the deepest, darkest places. And he's the Prince of Peace. That's the thing that Isaiah was longing for. Peace. He provides healing for that fatal divide that separates us from God. That sin that turns us away from him. The evil that might exist all around us. It happens because we sinned and we turned away from God. And now he comes as the Prince of Peace to heal it. Amazing that he would do that for us. And to end the hostility that might exist between us and God. And he did it on the cross. Jesus came as a baby in order to go to the cross, that the darkness might be replaced by light. So what is that child, this Son of God, this baby on Christmas? What does he do for us who live in a dark world? We have to be honest about that. John 1 again makes it clear. All who did receive him, who believed in his name, that's a key, who believed in his name. He gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Born of God. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. That's what that verse in Ephesians says. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. The only God, Jesus, who is at the Father's side, has made him known. So when you look at the baby in the manger, what you're seeing is not a baby. Well, you are seeing the baby. But you're seeing God. A God who loves us so much that he would do that in order to bring light into our darkness. God comes down Christmas Day to bring us out of darkness and to bring us back to him. This was just the beginning of his walk with us and the beginning of light in darkness. Through this child, through Jesus, through the light of the world. So once again, here's what Jesus says about himself. John 8, verse 12. Jesus says, remember we talked about the darkness and the light? He says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So if the darkness is just kind of the world around us, we don't walk in that darkness. We live with it, but we don't have to walk in it. If the darkness is something that kind of absorbs us inside, we don't have to let that control us either, because God brings the light of his love and his grace to us in Jesus. We can always walk in the light of Christ no matter what's happening around us. We can always have hope and life. We don't have to just, as somebody said, curse the darkness, but we can enjoy the light. And I intend to for the next 15 days in our homeowners association. Okay. And mutter maybe after that. But that's a powerful image, and I think a powerful Christmas prophecy that Isaiah shares with us. That this baby that we worship and that we honor and we celebrate today brings light into darkness, whatever that might be for us. And all we're asked to do, in a sense, is believe him. Believe him. And his gift will come into us. And because of that, Longfellow could write 2 more verses. and we're going to sing them. 2 more verses that talk a little bit about what light does in the midst of darkness. Peace on earth, peace in us. So why don't you stand and let's sing verses 4 and 5, okay?